Since the dawn of humanity, we have sought to understand our origin and purpose. We gaze at the starry sky, observe the complexity of life, and feel that there is something beyond the tangible, a primordial force that sustains all existence. This search brings us face to face with the greatest philosophical and spiritual enigma. If everything that exists needs a beginning, an original cause, how can we understand the existence of the one who has always been, who never had a beginning? The mystery of divine origin challenges our conception of reality, confronting our most basic understandings of causality, time, and existence. Our minds, accustomed to perceiving reality through linear sequences with a beginning, middle, and end, are perplexed by the idea of the eternal, the uncreated. How can there be something or someone that has simply always existed, without ever having been created or formed? Our human mind is programmed to understand everything through cause and effect. From childhood, we learn that every object has an origin, every person has parents, every event has a beginning. This logic serves us well in the material world, but when we approach the divine, we encounter a concept that completely defies this understanding, something that has simply always existed. Isn't it strange how our minds resist this idea so strongly? We instinctively look for a before, even when we talk about that which existed before itself had any meaning. When we talk about God, we are faced with a nature that completely transcends our usual understanding. He was not formed, generated, or created by anything or anyone. Unlike anything we know, God simply is. There is no moment when he came into existence, because his existence is eternal, without beginning and without end. This concept of eternity should not be confused with an infinite timeline. It's not that God has existed for a long, long time. The truth is much deeper. He exists completely outside the limits of time as we know it. God presents himself as the supreme and absolute source of all existence. If we could, for an instant, contemplate reality in its entirety, we would see that everything converges on a single point of origin, a primordial source from which all being emanates. If there was something before God, something that had originated him, then that something would be God. Can you see how this logic inevitably leads us to the concept of an uncreated being that exists by itself, being the very definition of the absolute? Modern science reveals something fascinating to us. Time, space, and matter are inseparably intertwined. There can be no matter without a place to exist, just as space cannot be conceived without a time that delimits it. The universe itself emerged from this triple interaction, a cosmic dance where these three elements came into existence simultaneously. What existed before that moment? Physics tells us that this question may not make sense, because time itself began with the Big Bang. There would be no before to be measured or conceived. But God is beyond this three-dimensional structure. He is not subject to the laws of the universe because it was he who established them. Imagine an author in relation to the book he has written. The characters live in the time of the narrative, while the author exists outside this system. In the same way, God is not contained in the universe. It is the universe that is contained in God. He transcends all material, temporal, and spatial limitations, being the very source of these dimensions. How could we hope to fully understand the one who created the very mechanisms through which we understand reality? Throughout history, philosophers and thinkers have dedicated their lives to trying to decipher this enigma. Plato spoke of a demiurge, an organizing principle that gave shape to the cosmos. Aristotle proposed the concept of the immovable motor, a first cause that initiates all movement without being moved by anything. St. Thomas Aquinas developed the 5 ways of proving God's existence, all converging on the need for an uncaused cause. Even in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, we find this intuition of a divine principle that exists by itself, without depending on anything prior. One of the most common mistakes when thinking about divine origin is to ask, if God created the universe, who created God? This question, although natural, contains a fundamental logical error. The need for a cause only applies to what has a beginning. What is eternal, by definition, does not begin to exist. It simply exists. It would be like asking, what exists north of the North Pole? Or, what is the color of silence? These questions apply categories to realities that transcend them. When we are faced with the uncreated, our rules of causality simply don't apply. To illustrate this concept of eternity, we can think of mathematical truths. When we say that 2 + 2 = 4, we are acknowledging a truth that was not created. It simply is. Nobody invented this reality. It was discovered because it exists independently of our perception. Mathematical equations and properties exist on an abstract, eternal, and immutable plane. If we accept that certain concepts can be eternal, why not consider that being itself, in its purest and most absolute form, can also exist eternally? The idea of a creator without an origin is not just a matter of faith, but a logical necessity. When we trace the chain of causes and effects, we realize that it cannot go back infinitely. There must be a starting point, a first cause that begins everything without depending on anything prior. Some scientists propose the multiverse or quantum fluctuations as alternatives, but even these theories only transfer the question: what caused the multiverse? What established the laws of quantum physics? In the end, everyone recognizes the need for something eternal. The only difference lies in how we name this primordial reality. Our inability to fully comprehend the eternal does not diminish its reality. It only reveals our limitations. How could we, beings confined in time and space, fully grasp that which transcends these dimensions? It would be like a fish trying to understand the concept of dry, or an ant trying to understand the internet. Intellectual humility leads us to recognize that there are truths beyond our total capacity to understand. We cannot measure the infinite with finite tools, nor understand the eternal with a temporal mind. And isn't it precisely this incomprehensible vastness that fills us with awe and reverence before the divine? The universe we inhabit is an intricate tapestry woven with three inseparable threads: time, space, and matter. These fundamental elements are so deeply intertwined that they cannot exist in isolation. Have you ever stopped to think what a material object that doesn't take up space would be like? Or a place that exists outside of time? The impossibility of these conceptions reveals the fundamental interdependence that underpins our reality. When we speak of the moment of creation, we are not describing the gradual emergence of different components, but rather the simultaneous birth of the entire cosmic structure. Modern physics, particularly since Einstein, has confirmed this unified vision of the cosmos. The theory of relativity teaches us that time is not absolute, but relative to the observer and intrinsically linked to space, forming what we call spacetime. Matter, in turn, bends the spacetime, creating what we perceive as gravity. This cosmic dance between matter, space, and time forms the basis of everything that exists in the physical universe. Isn't it fascinating that such complex structures as galaxies, planets, and even life arise from this fundamental interaction? When we contemplate the moment of creation, whether through the biblical narrative or the scientific model of the Big Bang, we find a surprising convergence. The Bible begins with the words, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." This simple phrase encapsulates a profound cosmological truth. In the beginning refers to time, the heavens represent space, and the earth symbolizes matter. What modern science only began to articulate in the 20th century had already been poetically described for millennia. The simultaneous creation of time, space, and matter as an indivisible triad. The Big Bang, often misunderstood as an explosion within space, was actually the expansion of space-time itself. Before this primordial event, there was no where for something to exist, nor a when to mark its duration. Matter, space, and time emerged together, like a cosmic symphony beginning with a single chord. This scientific understanding helps us visualize how the physical reality we know had a definite beginning, a zero moment beyond which our current physics cannot penetrate. What existed before that moment? This question may not make sense within our physical system, as the before itself only exists within time. God, however, is not contained by these limitations. Just as a programmer exists independently of the software he creates, God exists beyond the universe he established. He is not subject to the laws of physics because he was the one who conceived them. Imagine for a moment, if you could create a virtual world with its own rules and laws, would those rules affect you as the creator? Of course not. In the same way, God is not bound by the time he created, nor confined to the space he established, nor composed of the matter he formed. He completely transcends his creation while remaining intimately present in it. This divine transcendence helps us to understand why the question, "Who created God?" is fundamentally mistaken. The categories of causality that we apply within the universe do not extend beyond it. It would be like characters in a video game asking who programmed the programmer. They are trying to apply the rules of their limited world to a reality that exists in a completely different dimension. God doesn't need a cause because he exists outside the system where causality operates. He is, by definition, self-existent, the eternal I Am, as revealed to Moses. The impact of this understanding on our spiritual life is profound. If God exists beyond time, then for him there is no past, present, or future. Everything exists in an eternal now. Can you imagine what this means for your prayers, your challenges, your hopes? Your tears yesterday, your struggles today, and your victories tomorrow are all equally present to God. He is not responding late to your pleas. He was already there, at the moment of your need, before you even knew you needed to cry out. This eternal presence is an ineffable consolation for those who face the uncertainty of the future or carry the scars of the past. Contemporary science, far from challenging this vision, offers metaphors that help us glimpse divine transcendence. Physicists talk about additional dimensions beyond the 3 spatial and 1 temporal that we perceive. Imagine a 2-dimensional being living on a sheet of paper. For him, the 3rd dimension would be incomprehensible, and a 3-dimensional being would seem to possess supernatural powers, such as appearing and disappearing, simply by moving in and out of the plane of the paper. In the same way, God exists in a multidimensional reality that transcends our limited experience, and his interactions with our world can seem miraculous simply because they operate beyond the dimensions we perceive. Some question how Jesus, being God incarnate, could exist simultaneously as divine and human. This duality, which seems paradoxical in our 3-dimensional understanding, becomes more conceivable when we consider the multidimensional nature of divinity. A cube that crosses a 2-dimensional plane would appear to the inhabitants of that plane as a series of squares changing size, a limited manifestation of a greater reality. In the same way, the incarnation represents the entry of the divine into our limited dimension, without diminishing its transcendent existence. Jesus was able to be fully human in our dimension while remaining fully divine in the wider reality. The cosmic triad of time, space, and matter invites us to a profound humility and a sense of wonder before the divine. When we contemplate the distant stars whose brilliance has traveled for millions of years to reach our eyes, when we explore the subatomic particles that dance on the frontiers of existence, we are glimpsing fragments of God's creative wisdom. As the psalmist wrote, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows the work of his hands." Our scientific understanding of the cosmos does not diminish the divine mystery. On the contrary, it deepens our awe by revealing the complexity, precision, and beauty of the universe we inhabit. In every atom and galaxy, we find the signature of the Creator, inviting us to look beyond the material veil to contemplate the eternal reality that sustains it. One of the most persistent questions in the history of human thought is, if God created everything, who created God? This question, asked by curious children and renowned philosophers alike, reveals something profound about our way of understanding reality. We are so conditioned to see the world through the prism of causality that the idea of something without a cause seems almost inconceivable. However, when we look deeper, we realize that this question contains a fundamental logical error. It presupposes that everything, without exception, must have a cause. But is that really the case? The answer lies in the critical distinction between what begins to exist and what exists eternally. Our everyday experience confirms that everything that begins to exist needs a cause. A building needs builders, a child needs parents, a company needs founders. However, something that never began to exist, that has always been, would be exempt from this need. Applying the rule of causality to the eternal would be like asking about the temperature of the number 7 or the color of a thought. We are applying categories to realities that don't have them. Have you ever noticed how our mind creates paradoxes when it tries to go outside its own limits? The logical necessity of a first cause becomes evident when we consider the impossibility of an infinite regression of causes. Imagine a series of falling dominoes. Each one is knocked over by the previous one, but this chain cannot go back infinitely. There must be a first domino that starts the movement without being moved by another. The philosopher Aristotle called this the immovable engine, the one that moves everything without being moved, that causes everything without being caused. If everything in the universe is contingent, i.e. it depends on something prior, there must be something non-contingent, necessary in itself, which sustains all existence. When we reflect on what it means to be eternal, we need to overcome our conceptual limitations. Eternity is not simply endless time, It is the complete transcendence of time. God is not waiting through infinite ages. He exists in a perpetual now that simultaneously encompasses what we call the past, present, and future. This conception challenges our imagination, but it helps us understand why the eternal does not need a cause. Causes and effects occur within time, but what exists outside of time is not subject to this sequence. It would be like a perfect circle. Where is its beginning? Where is its end? The question doesn't apply to its nature. Interestingly, even some atheist thinkers recognize the logical necessity of something eternal. Philosopher and cognitive scientist Daniel Dennett, for example, admits that mathematical truths such as algebraic equations and geometric theorems simply exist. They were not created, they had no beginning, but they are eternally valid. If we accept that abstract concepts can exist eternally without a cause, why would it be inconceivable that a necessary being could also exist in this way? The laws of logic, mathematical principles, objective moral values, all point to transcendent realities that exist independently of our perception. Some propose the universe or multiverse as this eternal reality, eliminating the need for a creator. However, scientific discoveries consistently point to a definite beginning of our cosmos. The Big Bang was not just a reorganization of pre-existing matter, but the emergence of space-time itself. The theory of relativity and the second law of thermodynamics indicate that the universe is not eternal in the past. Furthermore, an eternal universe would be mechanistic, impersonal, while the consciousness, intelligence, and morality we observe seem to require an equally conscious, intelligent, and moral source. Would it be reasonable to suppose that the mind emerged from the non-mental, that consciousness arose from the unconscious, that intelligence sprang from the non-intelligent? The fundamental question is not whether something eternal exists, but what the nature of that eternal is. All systems of thought, even the most materialistic, eventually arrive at something that simply is, be it the universe, the laws of physics, or primordial energy. The difference lies in whether they attribute personal or impersonal, conscious or unconscious, intentional or mechanical characteristics to this ultimate foundation. Theism argues that it makes more sense for the intelligence, consciousness, and morality we observe in the universe to come from an equally intelligent, conscious, and moral source. After all, how could the greater arise from the lesser, the complex from the simple, order from chaos, without an intentional direction? When faced with the dilemma between a universe that arose from nothing, without cause or purpose, and a universe created by an eternal intelligence that exists of its own necessity, many consider the second option to be more reasonable and explanatory. It's the principle of Occam's razor in action. The explanation that requires the fewest additional assumptions tends to be the correct one. A universe without a creator requires us to accept the spontaneous emergence of everything from nothing, the emergence of order from chaos, and the development of consciousness from unconscious matter, each of these transitions requiring additional explanations. The existence of an eternal and necessary creator provides a more elegant and unified explanation. The mathematician Kurt Gödel demonstrated, through his incompleteness theorems, that in any sufficiently complex formal system there will be truths that cannot be proved within the system itself. This revolutionary discovery has profound philosophical implications. Our understanding of ultimate reality will always require axioms, fundamental truths that we accept without proof. Both the theist and the atheist eventually arrive at these fundamental truths. The difference lies in which basic truth seems most consistent with the totality of our human experience. Consciousness, morality, beauty, truth, love, meaning. A personal and eternal creator offers a more coherent basis for these aspects of reality than a blind and purposeless process. As our scientific understanding deepens, we don't diminish the need for God. We just refine our perception of how the first cause relates to secondary causes. Science describes the mechanisms of the universe, but it doesn't explain why these mechanisms exist or why they are comprehensible to the human mind. As Einstein observed, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. This intelligibility of the cosmos suggests a mind behind it, a mind that has structured the universe in a rational and orderly way. When we contemplate the laws of physics, we are, in a sense, glimpsing the thoughts of God expressed in the mathematical language of creation. Isn't it extraordinary that we can understand the cosmos? That our limited minds can decipher the patterns underlying reality? This correspondence between our rationality and the rationality of the universe points to a common source, a supreme intelligence that underlies both creation and our ability to understand it. Among the greatest mysteries we face when contemplating the divine, perhaps none is as profound as the nature of consciousness. We think, feel, dream, and reflect, but what exactly is this inner spark we call mind? Modern science, with all its technological advances, still gropes in the shadows when trying to define consciousness. We can map brain regions, measure electrical impulses, and observe chemical reactions, but the leap from matter to subjective experience, how physical sensations become the experience of pain, how sound waves become music in our perception, remains a baffling enigma. If we don't fully understand our own consciousness, how could we hope to understand God's infinite consciousness? This reflection leads us to a fascinating question that has challenged theologians and philosophers alike. How could Jesus be both divine and human? Common logic suggests a contradiction. How can something be limited and unlimited at the same time, finite and infinite, created and uncreated? This apparent paradox invites us to transcend our linear thinking and recognize that some realities require a multidimensional understanding. Just as light can behave as both a wave and a particle simultaneously, a paradox that quantum physics accepts, the dual nature of Christ challenges us to expand our mental categories to accommodate a truth that transcends our conceptual schemes. Think for a moment about how consciousness works on different levels. Even in our human experience, we are able to inhabit multiple worlds simultaneously. A composer can be physically seated at the piano, sensorially aware of the keys under their fingers, emotionally connected to the melody they are creating, and intellectually aware of the theoretical structure of the music. All these levels of consciousness coexist without contradiction. If our limited human consciousness already operates in multiple dimensions, isn't it reasonable to consider that divine consciousness can exist simultaneously in different realities and manifestations without compromising its essential unity? Energy, another fundamental concept of reality, also offers us insights into the divine nature. Physics teaches us that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed. This law of conservation, far from contradicting the theistic conception, can be seen as a reflection of divine eternity in the natural world. Energy exists in different forms: kinetic, potential, thermal, electromagnetic, manifesting itself differently while maintaining its essence. In the same way, the divine manifests itself in different ways while preserving its essential nature. Have you ever stopped to consider how this universal principle might be reflecting a transcendent truth about the Creator himself? The incarnation of Christ represents the culmination of this principle, God manifesting himself in human form without diminishing his divinity. Like light refracted through a prism, revealing a spectrum of colors that was always present in the original white light, the incarnation does not divide or diminish divinity, but reveals it in a way that is tangible and accessible to human experience. The question is not whether Jesus could be divine and human simultaneously, but how could we expect God, upon entering our reality, to manifest himself in any other way than by embodying both natures? Christian mystics often describe the experience of God as something that transcends rational understanding while remaining profoundly real and transformative. St. John of the Cross spoke of the cloud of not knowing, that paradoxical state where the deepest knowledge of God comes through recognizing the limits of our knowledge. This learned ignorance, as Nicholas of Cusa called it, is not a surrender of reason, but its improvement, the humble recognition that some realities are too great to be contained by our limited mental structures. Isn't this the pinnacle of wisdom, knowing the limits of our knowledge? Quantum physics offers fascinating parallels that help us glimpse how apparently contradictory realities can coexist. Bohr's principle of complementarity demonstrates that quantum phenomena require complementary descriptions that seem mutually exclusive, such as wave-particle duality. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle reveals that there are fundamental limits to what we can simultaneously know about certain particle properties. These scientific discoveries do not prove theological truths, but remind us that reality at its deepest levels often defies our conventional logical categories. If the subatomic world already forces us to expand our understanding, how much more so the transcendent reality that created it? Our acceptance of mysteries such as consciousness and energy, even without fully understanding them, offers a precedent for our acceptance of the divine nature. We all recognize and use electricity without fully understanding its essence. We trust in our consciousness and free will without being able to explain precisely how they arise from neural connections. If we accept so many mysteries in our daily lives, why would we demand an exhaustive understanding of the one who, by definition, transcends all categories? Faith is not an irrational leap in the dark, but a reasonable trust based on sufficient evidence, even in the face of incomplete understanding. History records countless testimonies of people who have experienced profound transformations through their encounter with the divine. Broken lives have been restored, seemingly invincible addictions have been overcome, deep-rooted hatreds have been replaced by compassion and forgiveness. These tangible fruits point to a reality that, although it cannot be dissected in a laboratory, manifests observable effects in the world. How could we explain the radical transformation of a Paul of Tarsus, from persecutor to apostle, or of a John Newton, from slave trader to abolitionist and author of Amazing Grace, without recognizing the transformative power of an encounter with something or someone beyond the material? When we confront the mystery of the divine nature, we are invited not to comfortable ignorance, but to wise humility. We recognize that our understanding, as finite creatures, will always be partial when we contemplate the infinite. This stance is not anti-intellectual, on the contrary, it is a mature recognition of the limits inherent in our condition. As Augustine said after years of trying to understand the Trinity, "If you have understood, it is not God." True knowledge of God combines the utmost intellectual effort with a humble acceptance that He will always be greater than our categories, deeper than our analyses, and more mysterious than our most sophisticated explanations. And isn't it precisely this transcendence that makes the spiritual journey an endlessly fascinating adventure? If God exists beyond time and space, how can we know Him? This fundamental question presents us with an apparent paradox. How does the eternal communicate with the temporal? How does the infinite manifest itself in the finite? How does the transcendent become immanent? The answer to this mystery lies at the heart of divine revelation. God, in His infinite wisdom and love, has chosen to manifest Himself within the limitations of our reality, adapting Himself to our capacity for understanding without compromising His essential nature. Isn't it extraordinary to think that the creator of billions of galaxies would be interested in establishing a personal relationship with beings as small and temporary as us? The Bible begins with the words, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." This statement not only describes a cosmic event, but establishes a fundamental truth. God existed before the beginning. Before the first particle vibrated in the void, before the first photon illuminated the primordial darkness, He already was. And even more remarkably, this eternal God chose to create a cosmos with beings capable of knowing Him. Creation was not a cosmic accident, but an intentional act by a being who wanted to be known. Have you ever wondered what this reveals about the nature of the divine? That the omnipotent Creator desires relationship with His creation? Divine revelation always operates through accommodation. God communicates not as He is in His incomprehensible essence, but in ways that we can grasp within our limitations. When the Bible speaks of God walking in the garden, stretching out His arm, or coming down to see, it is not literally describing a being with human form, but using language we can understand to communicate deeper truths. In the same way that we explain complex concepts to children through simplified analogies, God uses accessible language, symbols, and experiences to reveal aspects of His transcendent nature. This accommodation does not diminish the truth, but makes it accessible. The culmination of this revelation takes place in the Incarnation. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. In Jesus, the eternal entered time, the infinite was clothed in the finite, the transcendent became immanent. Like a three-dimensional story unfolding on a two-dimensional page, divinity expressed itself through humanity without losing its essential fullness. Christ became the bridge between the eternal and the temporal, allowing limited beings like us to glimpse the limitless. "He who sees me sees the Father," said Jesus, offering not only teachings about God, but a visible and tangible manifestation of divinity itself. Isn't it surprising that God's supreme manifestation came not as overwhelming power, but as loving vulnerability? The nature of divine revelation resolves another apparent paradox. How do we reconcile an immutable God with a God who answers prayers and interacts with human history? God's immutability does not mean rigidity or staticness, but constancy in His nature and purposes. A composer who creates a symphony foresees all the notes and movements, but this does not diminish the liveliness and dynamism of the music when performed. In the same way, God, in eternity, knows and determines all His interactions with time without reducing the authenticity of these interactions when they take place in history. His promises for the future and His answers to our prayers are not last-minute improvisations, but temporal expressions of His eternal decisions. Many question how an eternal God could care about our temporal concerns. This question reveals more about our conceptual limitations than about God's nature. Let's consider an analogy. A great conductor doesn't lose his appreciation for a single note within the symphony. On the contrary, his greatness is manifested precisely in his attention to the smallest details and how they contribute to the harmony of the whole. In the same way, God's eternity does not distance him from our momentary lives, but allows him to value every moment, every prayer, every tear, with an intensity that we, prisoners of time, can barely imagine. His transcendence does not diminish his immanence, it amplifies it. How do we personally experience this eternal God? This is where the fundamental role of the Holy Spirit comes in, who acts as the living link between the divine and the human. He is not just an abstract theological concept, but a real presence that transforms our limited consciousness, allowing us to perceive and respond to transcendent reality. Paul describes this process as beholding the glory of the Lord with unveiled face, being transformed from glory to glory. It is an encounter that does not annul our humanity, but elevates it. It does not eliminate our intellect, but enlightens it. It does not suppress our individuality, but completes it. The Holy Spirit gives us discernment, strengthens our faith, and allows us to see beyond what our physical eyes can perceive. This progressive revelation of God manifesting himself in history, in the Scriptures, in Jesus Christ and through the Holy Spirit, creates a bridge between the eternal and the temporal that allows for an authentic relationship without eliminating the fundamental distinction between creator and creature. As C.S. Lewis observed, it is precisely because God is totally other that he can be fully present in our reality without being limited by it. Divine transcendence is not a barrier to relationship, but its condition of possibility. Only a truly transcendent God could be simultaneously present in every moment and place of creation without being fragmented or diminished. Christian mystics often describe the experience of God as a luminous darkness, a knowledge that transcends knowledge, a vision that goes beyond vision. Moses encountered God in thick darkness. The prophets were overwhelmed by visions that defied description. Paul spoke of revealed mysteries that transcended human wisdom. These testimonies do not indicate a flight from rationality, but its refinement, the recognition that our conceptual apparatus, however sophisticated, will always be inadequate to fully capture divine reality. Just as a two-dimensional map can never perfectly represent a three-dimensional territory, our language and concepts will never exhaust the fullness of the divine. However, this inadequacy does not imply failure or futility in our search for God. On the contrary, it means that the spiritual journey is infinitely fascinating, always leading us to new depths, new heights, new glimpses of transcendent reality. Each revelation becomes not an endpoint, but a portal to even deeper knowledge. The light we receive should not be kept selfishly, but shared generously, for we have been called not only to know the eternal, but to be its ambassadors in time, instruments through which the infinite continues to manifest itself in the finite, leading others to discover that the God who existed before the beginning desires a personal relationship with each one of us, here and now, in time and eternity. What's the point of understanding God's eternal nature if that understanding doesn't completely transform our temporal existence? Every profound truth demands an answer, not just an intellectual one, but an existential one. As we glimpse the mystery of the uncreated God, we are inevitably confronted with a fundamental question. How should we live in the light of this eternity that now touches our temporality? It's not just our minds that are challenged, but our whole lives, our choices, our values, our priorities, our purpose. The revelation of the eternal never leaves the temporal untouched. Our perception of time changes radically when we contemplate it from the perspective of eternity. The ancient Greeks distinguished between chronos, the chronological, sequential time that marks our days, and kairos, the opportune moment, full of meaning and potential. We live in chronos, but we are periodically visited by kairos, moments when the eternal breaks through the monotony of everyday life and offers us glimpses of a greater reality. A sunset that leaves us speechless, an encounter that changes the course of our life, an insight that suddenly illuminates our entire existence. These are moments when we feel that something transcendent touches our ordinary reality. Have you ever experienced those moments when time seems to pause and something deeper reveals itself? Understanding divine eternity transforms our relationship with life's circumstances. What we consider successes or failures, joys or sorrows, gains or losses, everything acquires a new perspective when seen in the light of eternity. It's not that our temporal experiences lose importance. On the contrary, they gain a deeper meaning as part of a larger narrative. As C.S. Lewis wrote, "If you have read the story to the end, you know that every tear will be wiped away." This trust does not make us indifferent to present suffering, but gives us the strength to face it with a resilience based not on passing circumstances, but on the unchanging reality of divine love. The Holy Spirit works as the transforming agent that leads us to a deeper understanding, not only of God, but also of everything around us. He gives us discernment, strengthens our faith, and allows us to see beyond what our physical eyes can perceive. When we are troubled by anxieties, confused by decisions, or disoriented by the storms of life, the Spirit reveals that behind every circumstance there is a greater will acting on our behalf. Wouldn't it be revolutionary to live each day with this awareness, that we are not adrift in an indifferent universe, but sustained by eternal hands that direct all things for a benevolent purpose? The light we receive through this understanding is not meant to remain hidden, but to be shared. We have been called to be instruments of hope and truth for those who have not yet experienced God's transforming love or who have, at some point, turned away from it. Every insight we receive, every glimpse of eternity we experience, every transformation that takes place in our lives, all this is given to us not only for our personal edification, but for the benefit of those around us. The deepest truth about reality is not a treasure to be hoarded, but a light to be spread. How have you shared this light with those who walk in darkness? To those who at some point have strayed, God today makes a call full of love and mercy. Come back to me. This invitation is not laden with condemnation, but with an infinite tenderness that recognizes our fragility and still wants to restore the broken relationship. Divine love never changes. Its grace is always available. Its patience is never exhausted. No matter how far you've gone, no matter how many wrong decisions you've made, no matter how long you've spent away, the Father's embrace remains open, ready to welcome the prodigal son who decides to return. This is the incomparable beauty of the love that existed even before time began, a love that persists unchanged through all ages and vicissitudes. This is the moment to start again, to inaugurate a new life founded on an understanding of the eternity that inhabits time. If you feel this call reverberating in your heart, respond with faith and declare, "Lord Jesus, I accept you as my only and sufficient Savior." This decision, far from being a mere religious formality, represents a complete reorientation of existence, a realignment of our temporality with divine eternity. It is recognizing that our destiny is not determined by the limitations of time, but by the infinitude of the love that created us, redeemed us, and leads us towards an eternal purpose. May this decision renew your soul and mark a watershed in your spiritual journey. The perception of the eternal and the temporal not only transforms our view of the present, but also revolutionizes our understanding of the future. Christian hope is not a vague aspiration for better days, but a certainty anchored in eternity. The Apostle Paul describes our current condition as seeing in a mirror in an enigma, but promises a time when we will see face to face. Our current partial and fragmented understanding will be replaced by direct and complete knowledge. The glimpses of beauty, truth, and goodness we experience now are only samples, foretastes of what awaits us when the temporal is finally absorbed by the eternal, when the finite finds its fullness in the infinite, when our limited temporality is transformed into the likeness of divine eternity. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote that life must be lived forward, but it can only be understood by looking back. This observation takes on a special depth when considered in the light of eternity. Our temporal journey, with all its complexities, contradictions, and confusions, will only be fully understood when contemplated from the perspective of eternity. The seemingly disconnected chapters of our story will be revealed as part of a coherent narrative. The unanswered questions will find their resolution. The seemingly meaningless sufferings will reveal their hidden purpose. Like the last chord of a magnificent symphony, everything will converge into a harmonic resolution that will justify every dissonant note that preceded it. While we await this consummation, we are called to live each moment with an awareness of the eternity that permeates it. Every act of kindness, every word of truth, every expression of beauty, every gesture of love, all have eternal significance. In a universe without God, everything eventually dissolves into cosmic oblivion. In a universe created and sustained by the eternal, nothing of value is ever lost. As T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall never cease to explore, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." The journey we began in time will find its consummation in eternity, when we will finally fully know the one who, even before the first star shone, already knew us and loved us with an eternal and unchanging love. This understanding transforms us. We cannot contemplate the infinite and remain satisfied with the superficial, glimpse the eternal, and continue to live only for the momentary. We are called to a deeper, more conscious existence, more aligned with the ultimate reality that sustains all things. The God who existed before the beginning invites us on a journey that begins in time but transcends its limits, an adventure that leads us ever deeper into the inexhaustible mystery of His being and His purpose for our lives. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected for you some videos full of profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards transforming your reality.